The First Voyage of Sinbad. My father dying while I was very young, and leaving me a considerable fortune, I fell into a course of dissipation that injured my health and destroyed my fortune. Having no parent to control me, and being surrounded only by profligate persons, I continued my excesses till I fell into a fit of sickness. My riotous companions then forsook me, and I was left alone to struggle with my diseases, and to endure the severity of remorse for a misspent youth. At length I recovered from my illness, and resolving never to return to my former course of living, I collected together the remains of my fortune, sold my furniture by public auction, and embarked with several merchants on board a ship, which we had jointly laden with merchandise, for the port of Balsora. In the course of our voyage we touched at several islands, where we sold or exchanged our goods. One day we were becalmed near a small island almost level with the surface of the water, and which resembled a beautiful green meadow. The captain ordered his sails to be furled, and the merchants, among whom was myself, and several officers of the ship, determined to carry our provisions, and dine upon the little island. While we were in the very midst of preparation for dinner, shouting, laughing, and had kindled a large fire to dress our provisions, the island began to move. And at the same moment those who were left in the ship called to us to re-embark instantly, or we should all be lost, as what we had taken to be an island was only the back of a monstrous whale. The nimblest sprung into the sloop, others jumped into the waves, and betook themselves to swimming, but for my part one was still on the back of the whale when he dived into the sea, and had only time to catch hold of a broad piece of wood that had been brought out of the ship to serve as a table. On this piece of wood I floated, but the current carried me away from the ship, and the captain having received on board those who were in the boat, and picked up one or two of the swimmers, he concluded that I was lost. A favorable gale just then springing up, he hoisted the sails, and pursued his voyage. I struggled to save myself all the rest of the day and the following night. Next morning I found my strength gone, and despairing of my life, when happily a wave threw me against an island. The bank was steep, high, and rugged, yet, faint and exhausted as I was, I climbed it by the means of some roots of trees that seemed to have been preserved in this place for my safety. I then lay down till the sun appeared, when, crawling on my hands and knees in search of some herbs to eat, I found a spring of excellent water. Having refreshed myself greatly with the water, I advanced farther along the high shore of the island till I came to a cave, wherein I lay down, and slept profoundly during many hours. When I awoke again it was almost sunset. I hastily left my cave to search for some habitation. However, I found none, but I soon came to a small plain, surrounded with fine trees bearing all sorts of fruit, and what surprised me most was to see a great number of beautiful young colts grazing together, but no traces of any other animals. I supped upon fruit, and climbed the branches of a high tree for my lodging. About midnight I was greatly astonished and alarmed to hear the sound of trumpets and drums, which seemed to pass all round the island, and continued through the night, but when morning came, it still appeared to be uninhabited. The next day I discovered that the island was small and round, and that no other land was to be seen from it. I now gave myself up for lost. Every part of the shore abounded with enormous sea snakes, and of fishes that are 100 and 200 cubits long, some having heads like owls, and others with human faces. But I found these sea monsters perfectly harmless, for on my rattling 2 sticks together, they dived into the sea, and I saw no more of them. I climbed my tree again that night, and the drums and trumpets at midnight seemed to be even louder than before. On the 3rd day, to my great joy, a party of men landed on the island, who were completely astonished to find me there. Having related to them the strange accident that had befallen me, they gave me some provisions, and then informed me they were the grooms of King Mirage, and that the island upon which I was thrown was called Castle. It belonged to the warlike Jenny Digio, who visited it every night with drums and trumpets, and that the Jenny, being the friend of King Mirage, permitted him to have his young colts trained upon the island, which contained such admirable pasture, that they became the swiftest and finest horses in the world, and that they, the grooms of the king, were sent at the expiration of every 6 months to the island, to select such of the young horses as were fit to be placed in the royal stables. The grooms carried me with them to the capital of King Mirage, which was a fine harbor, where ships arrived daily from all quarters of the world. The king allowed me apartments in one of his palaces, and delighted greatly in my conversation. One day, having walked to the principal quay, several seamen were busily employed in unloading a ship newly arrived in the harbor. As I cast my eye on some of the bales of goods that were landed, I perceived them, by the marks, to be the same that I had put on board when I embarked for Balsora. I also knew the captain, but supposing that he believed me to have perished, I carelessly asked him to whom those bales belonged. To a merchant, he replied, of Baghdad, who unfortunately perished at sea. And I intend to trade with them till I meet with some of his family, to whom I will account for the profit. Captain, said I am Sinbad, and those bales are mine. The captain started, and lifting up his hands and eyes with amazement, cried Ut aloud, Is there no faith left among men? I and many of my passengers saw Sinbad swallowed up in the waves, many hundred leagues from hence, and yet you tell me you are Sinbad. What matchless impudence! You look like an honest man, and yet you tell a horrible falsehood to possess yourself of that which does not belong to you. But some other persons coming from the ship instantly knew me, and I was not long in convincing the captain that I was the real Sinbad, and no impostor, upon which he presented me my bales with 1,000 congratulations. I offered him a part of my goods in requital for his probity, but this he steadily refused. I then selected the most valuable articles out of my bales, and presented them to King Mirage, who accepted my present, and gave me a rich one in return. I then took leave of him and the whole court, and went on board the same ship, after I had exchanged my goods for the commodities of the country, and then came to the city with 100,000 sequins. Here I bought slaves of both sexes, fine lands, and built a great house and settled myself, determined to forget my past dangers, and to enjoy the pleasures of life. Sinbad then ordered the musicians to go on with their concert, and when it was ended, he gave a purse with 100 sequins to Hindbad, saying, Take this, Hindbad, return home, and regale yourself with your family tonight. But come back tomorrow, when you shall hear much more extraordinary adventures that have befallen me than those of my first voyage. The porter went home astonished at the honor done him, and his wife and children, at their plentiful supper, prayed to God to grant a long life to the generous Sinbad. On the following day Hindbad put on his best clothes, and returned to the bountiful traveler, who received him kindly, and after a sumptuous dinner was ended, and the company were ready to attend to him, he began the history of his second voyage. Goodbye, my friends.